Welcome to the Founder Leader podcast, where we unpack what scaling a company does to people, relationships, and leadership. I'm Yohanna. I'm your host and program manager for the leadership development program with the same name, Founder to Leader. And in each episode, I'm joined by 3 guests with different perspectives to help me unpack a real leadership dilemma. So let's get started. Welcome to the Founder Leader podcast. If you are listening for the first time, hi, I'm so happy to have you here. And if you are a regular listener, a quick update before we get started, because from now on, each episode will focus on one dilemma instead of 3. So this means that the episodes will be shorter and they will be more focused, and we will also start releasing them every other week instead of once a month. So that's very exciting. And also, while I'm at it, I'll also give a quick reminder that you can always submit your own dilemma anonymously through the link in the description. But in this episode, we're unpacking what happens when you go from running the lab to running a company and start losing control of what's actually happening inside the lab. And joining me today are founder Marvin Holten, researcher Signe Vikkelsø, and leadership coach Jung. So Marvin, you are the co-founder and you are the CTO at DIASENSE, and you come from a research background in quantum technology. So very happy to have you here.
Yeah, thank you.
And Signe, you are a professor of science, technology, and organization at Copenhagen Business School. So also a big welcome to you.
Thank you very much.
And Mia, you are the head of leadership development and a leadership coach for Founder to Leader at Copenhagen Business School. And this is not your first time in the studio, so I'm going to say welcome back.
Thank you very much.
So our dilemma for today is from Helena. And before I read that out loud, it's just a quick disclaimer that Helena isn't her actual name. But she writes, I founded my company on a decade of research, and until our last round, I was still in the lab most days, working alongside the team. But since the funding closed, I'm in investor meetings, board prep, and hiring loop most of the week, so I barely set my foot in the lab. When I do, my CSO gives me updates, and our results look reasonable, but I feel out of control because I'm only getting a more polished version of the truth. So I'm not on top of the potential risk, what's not getting done, and what people are frustrated about. It feels very scary, and I'm unsure if this is how it's supposed to be, or if I should start being more involved in the lab. What is your view on this? So Marvin, you have made a similar transition from being deep in the science and then leading a company. So what stands out to you in this dilemma?
Yeah, I mean, that actually resonates very well with me because when we started our company, we were also 2 people. I was the only one in the lab. And basically, we are building a microscope, and I was basically touching every screw of this microscope. And now today, we are a total of 15. And I barely get to be in the lab myself. That's, I think, my first response to Helena that, yes, I think that is very natural, that this is a scary feeling when you suddenly out of your comfort zone in the lab, working alone, having control over everything. And now many tasks are actually executed by other people and you can't check every detail anymore.
And what has been the hardest for you in that transition?
I think the hardest is really this feeling that you can't check all the details anymore and you have to trust that people do their work right. And in many cases, what we do as a deep tech startup is very high risk research. So if something goes wrong, that can cost 50,000, 100,000 euros easily.
Got it. And I have more follow-up questions, but I would love to see also your view. So what can we learn kind of from your research in relation to this dilemma?
Mm-hmm. I mean, first, I think this is a classic founder dilemma, but it's also a classic organizational dilemma that once you move up the hierarchy or to have responsibility for other persons than yourself, you have to use other sides of yourself, and that may not be those that you actually that gave you success in the first place. So when you're a scientist, you use parts of yourself that you have become very well at using. And parts of those you have to put to the side and find other way of establishing contact with what you lead. And I think you mentioned the role of trust, Marvin, and I think it's also about reframing trust because it's not only about giving up, control. It's about reframing what is control and how can you gain control in other ways. or trust in other ways, to anchor your trust in something.
Get it. And what can that look like? Do you recognize yourself in that, Marvin? Kind of reframing what control means for you now when you're leading a growing company? What has that been like for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think what also resonates very much with me is this idea that yes, I made this active decision to actually become a leader and to also realize that this transition is part of it. So to also then trust in my own abilities in going forward and trust in the others that they will also basically learn from me and from the whole environment in a startup and actually be able to execute their tasks independently. And
And I'd love to hear also your perspective here, Mia, because this kind of mental and role transition is from founder to leader, and also here, like from researcher to founder to leader, is something that we work with in the founder leader program. So curious to hear your take on this dilemma as well.
Yes, and I think many founders, they really struggle with this identity switch when they have to sort of do this role identity transition, and that's a big part of also what we work with the founders in the program. And one thing is the functional role that you transition from being in the lab and having a more hands-on role there, and you can kind of understand that you are moving into a CEO role. That's a functional role, and you know rationally that there are certain tasks that falls under that role. But then there's also the role identity, and sometimes there's a bit of a misalignment, or very often there's a bit of a misalignment when that transition happens, that you can enter into a functional role before you actually make the role identity transition into the role, and also letting go of old identities, the old identities of being a researcher, the old identities of being an early stage founder where you're involved in all sorts of things, and that's how you create value. So this concept of role identity and role identity transition is pretty central here, and I'm also seeing that in the dilemma here, that maybe there's something about letting go and fully creating and moving into this new role identity.
And how do you work with that practically?
So I think there's both a rational side to it, that they intellectually understand this is what they need to do, this is the functional role, and that they cannot simply continue to have multiple roles. You need to split out and have different people do different roles for it to work in the organization, because ultimately at some point it just becomes too much when you have too much success, and you need more people to just be able to let them do their core task of whatever they need to do. So also understanding intellectually, it's actually important to let them do their job so you can focus on what is important for you, that only you can do in your role, and that the functional role also works on what is important for that role. But then at the same time, also working with them more emotionally and mentally, and to understand what is blocking them from making that role transition. Is it trust? Is it how they perceive authority? Is it how they perceive creating value? I'm only good enough if I'm the best person, if I'm leading from the front, if I can be the best in all kinds of things. So also looking at those patterns of what is shaping your beliefs and your emotional connection to creating value and contributing in the world and in an organization, and also then challenging those a little bit and say, like, well, maybe you don't need to be the one always carrying all the responsibility anymore for everything, but maybe you can also just focus here, and it's okay to let other people take responsibility. So there's a lot of work there that also happens about our underlying beliefs and our patterns and our belief systems.
I've seen nodding along.
And at the same time, I think there's also you get in the dilemma a feeling of some sort of anxiety, that this feeling out of control. I think it's definitely something about giving up what usually gives you pride or reward, but it's also reflecting a real, I think, genuine. It's also important to take seriously the feeling that you cannot just completely let go. So there's definitely something about finding out how you can establish new ways of having some sort of anchor or some sort of peek into or channel into operations and what goes on in the lab. And you need to find out what would those good occasions be, those good routines or for us, where you sort of just get a glimpse into what's going on. Because I think also as a founder, as a scientist, you also still have something to contribute, but not every day and every minute. But once in a while, just so make sure you think organizationally about what would those venues be or those routines be where you have this glimpse into what's going on, and also where you are not giving the polished version of what goes on. And I think that's also about creating a culture of what Amy Edmondson called psychological safety, where it's safe to also give you the bad news. And or those things that are difficult, because you might actually still be useful in that respect, and that will also be a real assurance to yourself that people will actually come to you if things are not going well.
Yeah, I think that's actually an extremely good point, because that was also the first thing I have written down when I wrote the dilemma, that she uses this word that she gets the polished updates, and that immediately raised also a big question for me. So maybe Helena is actually right, and she is losing control if she is getting polished updates. So she should always make sure that she gets the data from the lab that she needs. So and to create an environment where people, as you say, they should feel safe to come with a negative feedback. They could feel safe to say, okay, I did something wrong, something expensive broke, because otherwise you actually might lose control. I think that there is also some truth in this fear that you should take serious as a founder, and that I also try to always have this atmosphere of making sure that everyone knows, okay, if I have a break, an expensive tool, they can come to me and it's fine, and that is part of deep tech research. It can not always go right.
No, that's very true.
I think also it's about moving founders out of this black and white thinking, where it's either let go of everything or take control back and take over the steering wheel from everyone else. And to understand and to start to realize that there's so much space in between to work in the gray zones, and not just look at either or. Either I need to take back control, I need to go back into the lab, or I just completely delegate and trust everything is going to be fine, because both are bad, right? But there's so many appropriate pathways in the in-between. What is appropriate at that stage that you're in? Is everything under control? And maybe you can relax it a bit more. If there's really a need to be on the ball, maybe it's also okay to pull it a bit tighter and say, we need more frequent updates. I need to know what's going on. And to constantly be negotiating in the gray zones, like how frequently should we touch base? What do I need to know? What do I not need to know? And can we also change it maybe in a month's time when things look different, or we're closing the rounds or met the milestones? Then we'll do it in a different way.
Yeah, that is a tool I, for example, use, that I now started saying, okay, 1 or 2 hours per week I go to the lab. I actually am there. I'm not trying to take over, so I still let the other people do the work. I'm more like someone that can support. I ask some questions, and just to get a feeling, because I think otherwise there can definitely be blind spots that you miss when you're completely out. And yeah, I think that is a very good point. You can still keep some kind of control, and you can still be in the lab from time to time. You just have to make space for it.
Yeah, and I think the important thing here is to name it, to be able to verbalize, like, what am I doing? Why am I doing it? So it doesn't get implicitly misunderstood by the people as, okay, now the founder is back into the lab, now he wants to control, or they have different fantasies about what might be going on. But to also be really good at this meta communication, saying like, I'm not trying to take over here, but this is just because I need this information, and then I'll be back out. But so being able to communicate about what you do and naming your intention is super important when you are doing it, because the employees might not fully understand that.
And you could even make it into a sort of a meeting, say, how do we organize now in the situation where I can no longer be there every day, and I shouldn't be there every day. How can we do this? What would be meaningful? Should I come around, once a while? Or should we have a regular meeting? And it could be interesting to hear how you did it, Marvin.
Yeah, that's something we do. And then I think we also, we have, of course, a weekly tech meeting, and then we often also try to identify, so we identify very high risk tasks in the lab or things like this, and then I just offer my help. Should I be there when you do this very high risk task, for example, or the other way around? That also there is always a room that people can ask me, can you join for this task in the lab? That's something we are always aware of, that the possibility of me joining for certain tasks is always there. Yeah.
There was something about the delegation, because when you delegate, there's sometimes this misunderstanding that when you delegate to others a task or a responsibility, then you completely lose it yourself. So it's something that is fixed, you just distribute among you. But that's not how delegation work. Ideally, delegation works that you delegate the responsibility for the task, but you still have an overall responsibility for that delegation. So that's also a way of reframing, that you don't lose control, but you reframe what is it that you delegate, and you're still responsible for that delegation, and have a point of contact where you sort of revisit that delegation. How does it work?
Yeah, that is a very good point, because I think that's also something that I realized over this development, from being the person in the lab to being mostly outside. That is also a big chance, actually, because now I'm not the person anymore that sits there for a whole week doing data analysis, but now I can look at the project at a much bigger scale, and I can really see what are the risks that might actually prevent us from succeeding, and then I can really focus on these risks. So I think there's also a big chance, actually, to actually have much more control over the really high risk things that need to be watched out for.
I think there's also another aspect that we could bring in here is now we don't know if the CSO is a co-founder or if it's someone who was employed at a later stage, or how far the company is. But if this is also a company that is at the maturity stage where they have like several layers, and this is a hired in manager, the responsible for the research part, then there's also these dynamics about middle management, and when founders need to create the space for another person coming in and do the management, doing things in their own way, and giving them that space, and also leading through other people without being the one taking over and being in the front. So that transition is kind of its own challenge in itself, to let someone else and to be a good leader of leader, in that sense of guiding them and coaching them on like what is it that they need in order to lead their area well, through different layers.
What would you say then? What are some of the main differences between being a leader of leader and leader of like direct reports?
Well, I think especially for founders, it can be really difficult to not take over, because you have the vision, you have the company, you have the product so much under your skin, so you know best, because it's in your DNA. And that's also very seducing in this way. It's very inspiring to be around people who really have the answers to everything, because they're their embodiment of the business. So sometimes this, for founders to be able to also understand that their hired new managers will maybe not be as knowledgeable or expert or charismatic or whatnot as they can be when they are unfolding with their entire founder DNA. So it's really about taking a different kind of supporting role to also be able to coach their leaders to be good leaders, which is actually a completely different competence from leading yourself and being like leading frontline people.
I think also when you lead other leaders, you have to do two things. It's about coaching them in how they lead. What is it that they lead? Helping them get a sense of what is their success criteria, and how do they delegate, how do they coordinate. But it's also about saying, well, this is to understand, to give them a context for the context, an understanding of the context they lead in. So it's also about say, well, we are in an environment that consists of different things, and when you lead your unit, you have to be aware of the other things to coordinate with. So sort of giving this broader perspective that this leader leads in a context among other leaders. Yeah, and of course that is something that develops further as the company grows. Then you get these subspecialties and subdivisions. And of course, at the early stage, that's not how it is. That's a group of people. But nevertheless, it already begins at that point, this sort of coordination with other leaders as well.
And I think it's a very good point that especially at the early stage, actually, it's very important to be aware of this because in the beginning I had this expectation of when we have someone new coming in that we want to make a leader that immediately they will lead and they will succeed. And of course, that is not true. You actually, when new people come in, you actually have to build them up that they are able to take this position long term, and that can take half a year or a year until people reach this point where they are actually able to lead in this way. And it has of course been the same for me as a founder, that I was not immediately a leader, but it is a development, and I think that's something that's why it's so important to be aware of this very early on, that you actually need to build up your team to be able to lead at a later point. Start small, basically, that they do some student projects, and then we can slowly build it up. We also then think about some other tools that we do some workshops with them, and similar to the founder to leader, where we try to also basically convey some of the knowledge that we got as a founder and give this onwards to them.
I'm curious, what was the most surprising thing for you in that process of entering into that stage?
It's mostly this expectation versus reality, that you hire someone that on his profile has leadership experience already, but every startup is different. So they need time. It's not, no one comes in and immediately is ready to go and to lead a group of people in your startup. You need to actually work together with them and develop them into this point.
I come to think that there is also something about, we started with this, that you have to reframe or reconsider what is trust and what is control. And there's something about, it's not about only, you sometimes have this, that as you move up the hierarchy, you only get these sort of mediated reports from what goes on. So it's always some, note or some mail or some summary. And I think it's useful to also still allow yourself to sort of take a deep dive and just go visit and just have an informal talk with some people that are doing, things at the bench or whatever it is, to still have this sense of just anchoring in reality, and also pick up cues on what's going on, so that you can stay curious and also stay alert to some degree, but only as occasional visits. Because I think good managers don't give up this sort of relationship with the operational level, but they do it they dose it, carefully.
Yeah, so it becomes intentional.
Yes, and also as a way of relating directly, and I think that's also appreciated by people, that if you show this care for what goes on, it's not about micromanaging. You should not micromanage in that situation. You should just stay curious still and appreciative about what's going on.
Then to just go back to Helena's question of what is your view on this? So what I'm hearing is that this is understandably it is a difficult challenge, but at the end of the day, it's a very natural transition. Both transitioning into a new functional role with new tasks, etc., but also very much on the identity part and coming to terms that you are not only an expert who does the work anymore, but you're more a leader who enables other people in doing. And then also reframing control, that it doesn't only need to be that you are in the lab and you have your hands on everything, but it's also about creating routines and structures and system as well, so that you have a good enough look and understanding of what it is that's going on. And that might be asking questions, so actually asking what are the risks right now, or what is not getting done, and what are people frustrated about, if you haven't done that already. But it's also what you, Marvin, talked about, that you can still rejoin the lab from time to time, but then naming it for the CSO and also the rest of the team, the reason why you are there, so they also understand. And also what Signe, you said, that rethinking delegation as well, that it's not just giving everything away, but it's actually, you're not losing responsibility. And then also the last thing that I'm hearing is that because going back to the question of should I start being more involved in the lab, the risk then, of course, is also that you undermine the CSO and the leader that you have under you as well, and not letting that person lead efficiently. then that was unfortunately everything for today. So thank you so much, Marvin, Signe, and Mia for joining me. And to our listeners, thank you so much for your time. And remember to subscribe, review, and submit your own dilemma anonymously. Thank you. A quick note, this podcast is brought to you by Founder to Leader, Denmark's most established leadership development program for founders with personnel responsibility. The program combines organizational psychology with experiential learning and is delivered by Copenhagen Business School and the Danish Industry Foundation. It's free to participate, so read more and apply at foundertoleader.dk.